In this module, we will talk about assumptions. At times, we would like to see how a change in a value will affect the whole spreadsheet, or possibly how changes in multiple values might affect the spreadsheet. This can be accomplished by using cell references in formulas instead of using constants. By changing a value, it will then automatically change all references to it. This is what we mean by assumptions. And let's provide an example. Let's look at a monthly budget for a company called Rob's Computer Associates. We see over here that the revenue consists of services and investment, and we see the expenses that the company has as well. Most of these things are pretty straightforward, but if we take a look, I would like to know how was services obtained. We see a value in here for 10,200. What would happen if the services went to 12,000? Well, we'd have to type in 12,000 in this location and see the change. Or if it went to 15,000. Whenever we have to make a change, it does mess up our spreadsheet, and we have to look for the individual cell in which we have to make that change. Similarly, let's take a look at in the expense column, let's look at the phone expense. And we see the phone expense is $100. And similarly for a car expense, it's $370. And health insurance is $500. So if these numbers were going to be changed, we'd have to look in the spreadsheet to find that change. The advantage of assumptions is that we can have a separate area whereby we will call this assumptions, and when we want to make a change, we will make the change in that assumption area, and all cells that refer to this cell in the assumption area will then be changed accordingly. Let's demonstrate how this would work. I have now included an assumption area which appears underneath the spreadsheet. It's somewhat away from the actual spreadsheet, and if you take a look at it, you'll see in there are the values that we have in the spreadsheet. For example, going from the bottom to the top, supplies and parts 1530, and there we have 1530. Internet and phone is 100, there we have 100. And rent is 1500, we have 1500. The only thing where we have to do a little calculation is where on top we have services is 10,200, and this is a result of the product of 120 times 85. Now, what is the advantage of putting these numbers down here? The advantage is if we start from the bottom up, again, it doesn't make a difference. If we go to supplies and take a look at the number, it is not just typed in as it was earlier. Instead, it refers to the cell C33, which means that if I change supplies and parts, I would not have to change it in the cell C14, but I can immediately go down to the cell C33, and let's say it goes to 1800. Now watch what happens as I press the enter key. Automatically it is reflected in the spreadsheet itself. And the same thing holds for the other descriptions as well. Internet and phone, which is $100, if I go up to internet and phone on my spreadsheet, I will see that the $100 refers to C32, And again, if I change C32, it will change there as well. Let's change that to $160. And notice as we go up here and press enter, it is now $160. The rent as well, from $1,500, let's now say it went up to $2,000. Watch what happens as I put in 2,000 and check the rent on top, and you will now see it is 2,000. And finally, where we have services, let's take a look how that number was obtained. We see it's a product of C29 and C30. So if I would change a number down here, let's say the charge per hour was 85, and now we change it to 92. Watch what happens to the services as far as the amount. It now increases to 11,000. So you see, by looking at what if something happens, it's much easier to have an assumption area rather than look for the individual cell in the spreadsheet. And sometimes as the spreadsheets increase in complexity, to find the individual cell would be much more difficult. You may have them spread all around, and in order to find them, you may find most of them, but you may leave out one, and that will then mess up the spreadsheet. In contrast to having an assumption area whereby we can check all of the cells, whereby we can change the numbers and see how they will change accordingly in the actual spreadsheet on top.